The cellar door slammed shut, leaving Maribel Hayes in darkness so absolute she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. It was the third time this week her stepfather had banished her to the cold, damp underground room beneath their modest farmhouse on the outskirts of Awahi. Nevada punishment for a transgression as minor as letting the stew boil over while she tended to the washing. Maribel huddled in the corner on her thin straw mattress, pulling the single threadbare blanket around her shoulders as the autumn chill of 1879 seeped through the earthen walls. At 21, she was long past the age when most young women in town had married and started families of their own. But her stepfather, Frank Denton, had made certain she remained under his control since her mother's death 5 years earlier. "You'll stay down there until you learn some respect," Frank had growled as he pushed her down the stairs. What he really meant was, until he needed her to cook his breakfast at dawn. Maribel listened to his heavy footsteps overhead, moving toward the kitchen where he would finish off the last of her mother's cherry preserves with the bread she'd baked that morning. Frank never missed a meal, no matter how severely he punished her for imagined infractions. She touched her cheek where it still stung from his backhand punishment for daring to mention her intention to seek work at the new hotel in town. Independence was what Frank feared most. As long as she remained dependent on him, he maintained control of her mother's property and the small but steady income it provided. Maribel closed her eyes, though it made little difference in the pitch darkness. She had exactly $28.75 sewn into the hem of her dress, saved penny by penny over 5 years of selling eggs and occasional embroidery work, when Frank was too drunk to notice her absence. It wasn't enough yet, but soon she would have the means to escape. Sleep came fitfully that night, as it always did in the cellar. The dampness aggravated the cough she developed last winter, and rats occasionally skittered across the floor, their tiny claws scratching against the packed earth. By the time gray light filtered through the small, grimy window at ground level, Maribel was already awake, preparing herself for another day of servitude. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Frank stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the morning light. "Breakfast," he commanded, then turned away without waiting for her response. Maribel climbed the stairs, her muscles stiff from the cold. In the kitchen, she moved mechanically, stoking the fire in the cook stove and preparing Frank's usual morning meal of eggs, bacon, and coffee. Her own breakfast would be whatever remained after he had eaten his fill. As she worked, Maribel glanced out the window toward town. Awahi was growing. The silver mines in the nearby mountains had brought prosperity, and with it, new businesses and opportunities. If only she could claim one for herself. Frank ate in silence, his eyes occasionally lifting to study her with suspicion. When he finished, he pushed back from the table and grabbed his hat. "I'm heading to town for supplies. You'll tend the garden and finish mending my shirts before I return. And don't think about wandering off." The moment he was gone, Maribel leaned against the sink and took a deep breath. These moments of solitude were precious few. Sometimes, she dreamed of simply walking away, following the road out of Awahi to wherever it might lead. But with no family, no references, and limited funds, the world beyond was as frightening as it was alluring. She had just finished the breakfast dishes when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Curious, she peered out the window to see a man on horseback she didn't recognize. He rode a magnificent chestnut stallion and sat tall in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life on horseback. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace and approached the door. Maribel quickly wiped her hands on her apron and smoothed her hair, suddenly conscious of her appearance after a night in the cellar. A knock sounded, firm but not demanding. Maribel hesitated, knowing Frank would be furious if he discovered she had received a visitor in his absence. But curiosity overcame caution, and she opened the door just enough to peer out. "Good morning, madam," the stranger said, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair the color of coffee. His eyes were a striking blue that stood out against his sun-bronzed skin. "Name's Matthew James. I've just purchased the old Cooper Ranch to the north. I'm paying my respects to the neighbors." Maribel hesitated, but good manners prevailed. "I'm Maribel Hayes. This is my stepfather's property, but he's in town at present." Matthew nodded, his gaze taking in her appearance with a subtlety that nonetheless made Maribel conscious of her worn dress and the dark circles under her eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Hayes. I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed your well pump appears to be giving you trouble." He gestured toward the yard where the hand pump stood at an awkward angle. "I've some skill with repairs if you'd allow me to take a look." Maribel glanced at the pump. Frank had promised to fix it for weeks, but like most promises he made to her, it remained unfulfilled. She hesitated, weighing the risk of Frank's anger against the daily struggle of drawing water from a pump that required her full body weight to operate. "That's kind of you, Mr. James, but my stepfather prefers to handle such matters himself." Matthew's expression suggested he understood more than she had said. "Of course, but it wouldn't take more than 20 minutes and it would be a neighborly courtesy. Where I come from, we believe in helping one another." Something in his manner, a genuine kindness that asked nothing in return, swayed her. "Very well, Mr. James. I would appreciate the assistance." As Matthew worked on the pump, Maribel learned he had come from Montana, where he'd managed a large cattle operation before deciding to strike out on his own. He had purchased the Cooper Ranch with money saved over 10 years of hard work, intending to raise horses as well as cattle. "I've always had a way with horses," he explained as he tightened the last bolt on the now steady pump. "They understand honesty better than most people." Maribel watched his hands, strong but gentle, as they worked the metal components. Such hands would never strike in anger, she thought, then chided herself for the inappropriate observation. "There," Matthew announced, standing up and testing the pump with a few easy strokes. Water flowed freely. "Good as new, or better, perhaps." "Thank you, Mr. James, that's very kind." "Matthew, please." His smile was warm, "and it's no trouble at all." The sound of a wagon approaching sent a bolt of fear through Maribel. Frank was returning earlier than expected. "You should go," she said urgently. "My stepfather." Matthew nodded, understanding immediately. He collected his tools and moved toward his horse, but not quickly enough. Frank's wagon rounded the bend, and his expression darkened at the sight of the stranger in his yard. "What's going on here?" Frank demanded as he pulled the wagon to a stop. Matthew approached with his hand extended. "Matthew James, sir. I've purchased the Cooper place. Just introducing myself to the neighbors and offered to fix your pump when I saw it was listing." Frank ignored the outstretched hand. "Don't recall asking for help." His gaze shifted to Maribel, promising retribution later. "No harm intended," Matthew said easily, though his eyes had hardened slightly. "Just being neighborly." "We don't need neighbors," Frank snapped. "Especially ones who come calling when men are away from home." Matthew's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "I assure you, Mr. Denton, my intentions were honorable. Miss Hayes has been a perfect lady." "Get off my property," Frank growled. Matthew nodded once, placed his hat back on his head and mounted his horse. Before riding away, he turned to Maribel. "A pleasure meeting you, Miss Hayes." "Thank you for your hospitality." Maribel could only nod, her throat tight with fear of what would come after Matthew was gone. True to her expectation, the moment Matthew's horse disappeared from view, Frank rounded on her. "Entertaining men while I'm gone." Is that what you've been doing behind my back? No. He came to introduce himself, that's all. He fixed the pump as a kindness. Kindness, Frank spat. Men like that don't offer kindness without expecting something in return. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. I won't have you shaming your mother's memory with loose behavior. I did nothing wrong, Maribel protested, struggling to free herself. Frank's grip tightened. You've been getting ideas above your station ever since you mentioned that hotel job. Perhaps another night in the cellar will remind you of your place in this household. Please, Frank, I've done nothing to deserve punishment. You'll address me as father, he snapped, though they both knew he had never earned such a title. That night, Maribel again found herself in the cold darkness of the cellar, this time without even the blanket for warmth. Frank had been particularly vengeful, removing the straw mattress as well, leaving her only the hard, packed earth for a bed. As she huddled against the wall, Maribel thought of Matthew James and his kind blue eyes. In them, she had glimpsed a world where people treated one another with respect rather than cruelty. It was a dangerous thought, one that made her current circumstances all the more unbearable. 3 days passed before Frank allowed her to emerge from the cellar. By then, Maribel's cough had worsened, and she moved with the careful slowness of someone whose body ached from cold and hardship. You'll not mention our arrangement to anyone in town, Frank warned as she prepared to accompany him to purchase supplies. People would misunderstand. People would understand perfectly well, Maribel thought but didn't say. Frank's reputation in Awahi wasn't as pristine as he imagined. His behavior at the saloon was well known, as was his miserly nature and quick temper. Only his standing as one of the area's earliest settlers afforded him any respect at all. The trip to town was Maribel's first opportunity in months to interact with others. While Frank conducted business at the general store, she was permitted to visit the milliner's shop where her friend Sarah worked. Maribel, Sarah exclaimed when she entered. It's been an age. We've missed seeing you at church. Maribel offered a weak smile. Frank, my stepfather, prefers private worship at home these days. Sarah's expression conveyed her understanding. Well, I'm glad to see you now. Oh, have you heard about the new rancher who's taken over the Cooper place? They say he's quite handsome and not yet married. I've met him, Maribel admitted, her cheeks warming at the memory. He stopped by to introduce himself. And, Sarah pressed, leaning forward eagerly. And nothing, Maribel replied, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. He seems kind, that's all. Kind and handsome is a rare combination, Sarah sighed. You should set your cap for him before the other unmarried ladies in town descend like vultures. Maribel laughed, a sound so foreign to her own ears it startled her. I'm hardly in a position to set my cap for anyone. Sarah's expression sobered. Is it still so difficult with your stepfather? Before Maribel could respond, the shop door opened, and she turned to see Matthew James himself entering, hat in hand. Ladies, he greeted them with a tip of his head. Miss Hayes, a pleasant surprise. Maribel felt her face flush under his gaze. Mr. James, I didn't expect to see you in town today. Just picking up some supplies for the ranch. His eyes lingered on her face, noting with concern the pallor of her skin and the slight tremor in her hands. Are you well? You seem a bit under the weather. Just a slight cough, she assured him, though the truth was she felt as though she might collapse at any moment. The days in the cellar had taken their toll. Maribel, Frank's voice called from outside the shop. Time to go. She startled, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. I must go. It was nice seeing you both. Matthew frowned, his gaze moving to the door where Frank's silhouette was visible through the glass. Perhaps I'll stop by again sometime to check on that pump, make sure it's still working properly. The implied offer of intervention wasn't lost on Maribel. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary." She lowered her voice. "Please don't come by the house again. It complicates things for me." Understanding dawned in Matthew's eyes, along with something else: determination. "As you wish, Miss Hayes. But should you ever need assistance, my door is always open." As Maribel hurried out to join her stepfather, she felt Matthew's gaze following her. It was both comforting and terrifying to know someone had glimpsed her situation and cared enough to offer help. The return journey to the farm was silent, Frank nursing his customary bad temper after spending money on necessary supplies. Maribel kept her eyes on the passing landscape, trying to ignore the weight of dread settling over her as they approached home. That night, after preparing and serving dinner, she was permitted to sleep in her own small room rather than the cellar. It was a luxury that brought tears to her eyes as she sank onto the thin mattress. Her cough had worsened throughout the day, and now each breath rattled painfully in her chest. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by coughing spells that left her gasping. By morning, she knew she was genuinely ill, but Frank showed no sympathy when she struggled to rise. "Breakfast won't cook itself," he said dismissively when she mentioned feeling feverish. "You're not dying, just being dramatic." Maribel forced herself through the motions of her morning chores, each movement requiring concentrated effort. By midday, spots danced before her eyes, and she gripped the edge of the kitchen table to remain upright. Frank noticed her faltering and scowled. "If you're going to be useless, you might as well go lie down, but don't expect me to nurse you." It was as close to kindness as he was capable of showing. Maribel retreated to her room, collapsing onto the bed fully clothed. Fever dreams claimed her, vivid visions of escape interwoven with nightmares of being permanently entombed in the cellar. When next she opened her eyes, shadows had lengthened across her room, and the quality of light suggested late afternoon. Something had awakened her voices from the main room, one Frank's and the other Matthew James. Maribel struggled to sit up, straining to hear the conversation. "Concerned when I saw her in town," Matthew was saying. "She looked unwell." "My stepdaughter's health is my concern, not yours," Frank replied coldly. "Of course, but I've brought some medicine from Doc Wilson. He suggests willow bark tea for fever and this tonic for cough. No charge, he considers it a welcome gift for new residents." There was a pause, and Maribel could imagine Frank's internal struggle: refuse the free medicine out of pride or accept it to avoid spending his own money later. "Fine," Frank finally said. "Leave it on the table." "Actually," Matthew's voice remained pleasant but firm, "Doc Wilson instructed me on proper dosage. Perhaps I could explain it to Miss Hayes directly. She's resting. Then to you, sir, so there's no confusion. The wrong dose could be dangerous." Another pause, then the sound of heavy footsteps approaching her door. It swung open to reveal Frank, his expression stormy. "Visitor," he announced tersely. "The ranchers brought medicine." Matthew appeared behind him, his concerned gaze immediately finding Maribel. What he saw clearly alarmed him: her flushed face, the labored breathing, the way she struggled to remain sitting upright. "Miss Hayes," he said gently, "you appear quite ill." "Just a cold," she managed, though the words triggered another coughing spell that left her gasping. Matthew turned to Frank. "Sir, this is more serious than I realized. That cough sounds like it could be developing into pneumonia. She needs proper care." "I'll tend to her," Frank said, though they all knew it was a lie. Matthew's jaw tightened. "With respect, Mr. Denton, Doc Wilson would want to see her. I'd be happy to fetch him or take Miss Hayes into town myself." "That won't be necessary," Frank insisted. Maribel saw the conflict in Matthew's expression: concern for her welfare warring with respect for Frank's authority as her guardian. His next words surprised both her and Frank. "Mr. Denton, I'll speak plainly. Your stepdaughter's condition appears serious. If she doesn't receive proper care and recovers anyway, no harm done. But if she worsens without treatment and something happens to her, people will ask questions about why she didn't see the doctor." Frank's face darkened at the implied threat, but Matthew continued before he could respond. "I'm offering to take her to town at my own expense and bring her back once Doc Wilson clears her. You wouldn't be inconvenienced, and it would demonstrate your care for her welfare to the community." Maribel watched in astonishment as Frank's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Matthew had found the one argument that might sway him, concern for his reputation. "Fine," Frank finally said. "Take her to the doctor, but have her back by tomorrow. There's work to be done here." Matthew nodded, not pressing his advantage further. "Of course. I'll have her gather what she needs." "I'll wait outside," Frank muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to appear unreasonable. Once they were alone, Matthew crossed to Maribel's bedside, his expression grave. "Can you stand?" She nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain it was true. "I need to bring a change of clothes." "Of course." He helped her rise, steadying her when she swayed. "Is there a bag for your things?" Maribel pointed to a small carpet bag in the corner. As Matthew retrieved it, she carefully selected a clean dress, nightgown, and undergarments, wrapping them in a shawl before placing them in the bag. "What about this?" Matthew asked, picking up the worn Bible on her nightstand. "Yes, please. It was my mother's." She reached for her hairbrush on the dresser but stumbled, light-headed from the exertion. Matthew caught her elbow, his touch gentle but secure. "Easy now. Let me help you." His nearness sent an entirely different kind of warmth through Maribel, one that had nothing to do with fever. She was acutely aware of his clean scent soap and leather and open air and the strength in his hands as he supported her. "Thank you," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness but grateful for his presence. "No thanks needed." He closed the carpet bag and offered his arm. "Lean on me as much as you need to." The journey to Matthew's wagon seemed endless, each step requiring concentrated effort. Frank watched from the porch, his expression unreadable as Matthew helped Maribel up onto the bench seat. "I'll have her back tomorrow," Matthew assured him with a nod. Frank didn't respond, merely turned and went back into the house. As they pulled away, Maribel felt a curious mixture of relief and trepidation. She had never been away from home overnight without Frank's supervision. The freedom was as dizzying as her fever. "Rest against me if you need to," Matthew offered as the wagon bounced along the rutted road. "It's a fair distance to town." Maribel intended to maintain a proper distance, but as they traveled, the rocking motion of the wagon and her illness conspired against her. She found herself leaning more heavily against Matthew's solid frame, her head eventually coming to rest against his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she murmured, trying to straighten. "Don't be," he replied softly. "Just rest." The journey passed in a haze for Maribel. She was vaguely aware of arriving in town, of Matthew carrying her into Doc Wilson's office, of gentle hands examining her and voices discussing her condition. Words like pneumonia and exhaustion filtered through her consciousness. When she next became fully aware of her surroundings, she was in an unfamiliar bed in a sunlit room. Crisp white sheets covered her, and a patchwork quilt provided comfortable weight and warmth. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and curtains of blue and white gingham framed the window. Confused, Maribel tried to sit up, but weakness forced her back against the pillows. Where was she? This certainly wasn't Doc Wilson's examination room, nor was it her Spartan bedroom at Frank's farm. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair entered carrying a tray. Ah, you're awake. That's wonderful. She approached the bed and set the tray on the bedside table. I'm Mrs. Peterson. Matthew asked me to help look after you. Where am I? Maribel's voice emerged as a rasp. You're at Matthew's ranch, the old Cooper place. Mrs. Peterson poured a glass of water from a pitcher and helped Maribel drink. Doc Wilson said you needed at least a week of rest and proper care, and Matthew wouldn't hear of you going back to your stepfather's in your condition. Alarm shot through Maribel. But Frank, my stepfather, he's expecting me back today. Don't you worry about that, Mrs. Peterson soothed. Matthew rode out at first light to inform him of the doctor's orders. He's arranged everything. Maribel couldn't imagine Frank agreeing to such an arrangement, but she was too weak to argue the point. Mrs. Peterson helped her sip a warm broth that soothed her raw throat. This is the best bedroom in the house, Mrs. Peterson explained as she straightened the covers. Matthew insisted you have it. He's been sleeping in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands. Embarrassment flooded Maribel. I've displaced him from his own bed. I can't allow that. Nonsense. The man was quite clear on the matter. Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. He's worried about you, dear. The knowledge that Matthew had surrendered his own comfort for hers, a woman he barely knew, was overwhelming. No one had shown her such consideration since her mother's death. Later that afternoon, Matthew himself came to check on her. He knocked softly before entering, standing respectfully near the door. Miss Hayes, it's good to see you awake. His smile was warm, his blue eyes filled with genuine concern. How are you feeling? Better, thank you. It wasn't entirely a lie. The fever had broken, though she still felt weak as a newborn calf. But I'm deeply embarrassed to have caused such inconvenience. Matthew shook his head. No inconvenience at all. Mrs. Peterson tells me this is your room. I can't possibly. You can and you will, he said firmly. Doctor's orders. You need proper rest to recover. What did Frank say when you told him? She asked, dreading the answer. Matthew's expression tightened briefly. He understood the necessity. Maribel doubted that very much. He agreed. Eventually. Something in Matthew's tone suggested the conversation had been less than pleasant. What matters is that you're where you need to be to recover properly. I'm deeply grateful, Mr. James. Matthew, please. He moved a step closer. And you've nothing to be grateful for. It's simply the right thing to do. The days that followed were unlike any Maribel had experienced since her mother's death. Mrs. Peterson tended to her with motherly care, preparing nourishing meals and ensuring she took the medicine Doc Wilson had prescribed. The persistent cough began to ease, and her strength gradually returned. By the fourth day, Maribel was able to sit up comfortably and even walk to the window to look out over the ranch. The view was magnificent, rolling grasslands dotted with stands of cottonwood trees, a clear creek winding through the property, and in the distance, the mountains that gave Awahi its name. In the corral nearest the house, Matthew was working with a spirited young stallion. Maribel watched, mesmerized by the communication between man and animal. There was no harshness in Matthew's methods, only patience and a quiet confidence that eventually won the horse's trust. That evening, feeling considerably stronger, Maribel asked Mrs. Peterson if she might join Matthew for dinner. The older woman was delighted. About time. He's been asking after you every few hours. I'll help you dress. With Mrs. Peterson's assistance, Maribel changed into her clean dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was the best she owned. She brushed her long chestnut hair until it shone and pinched her pale cheeks for a touch of color. You look lovely, dear, Mrs. Peterson assured her. Like a spring flower after the winter snow. The dining room was modest but comfortable, with a solid oak table and matching chairs. A vase of wildflowers served as a centerpiece a touch Maribel suspected was Matthew's doing rather than the housekeeper's. When Matthew entered, his face lit up at the sight of her. "Miss Hayes, this is a pleasant surprise. Please call me Maribel," she offered, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "After all you've done for me, formality seems unnecessary." "Maribel," he smiled, testing the name as he held her chair. "I'm glad to see you feeling better." Dinner was simple but delicious: roast chicken, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden, and warm bread with honey butter. Matthew asked thoughtful questions about her interests and listened with genuine attention to her answers. No man had ever shown such interest in her thoughts before. As they enjoyed apple pie for dessert, Matthew broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Doc Wilson says you'll be well enough to travel by the day after tomorrow." Maribel nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Yes, I feel much stronger already. I've been thinking," Matthew said carefully, "about your situation with your stepfather." She tensed, setting down her fork. "What about it? It seems to me that it's not ideal." His eyes met hers directly. "The night you arrived, you were desperately ill. Doc Wilson said your condition was exacerbated by exhaustion and what appeared to be previous exposure to cold and damp." Maribel looked down at her plate, unsure how to respond. "I spoke with Sarah at the milliner's shop," Matthew continued gently. "She told me some things about your life since your mother passed, about the cellar." Shame washed over Maribel. "It's not as bad as it might sound. I think it might be worse." Matthew's voice was soft but firm. "No one deserves to be treated that way, Maribel. Especially not someone as kind and resilient as you've proven to be." Tears stung her eyes. "What choice do I have? I have no family, little money, and nowhere else to go." "You have choices," Matthew insisted, "more than you realize. Such as, for one, you could stay here." "Not in my house," he added quickly, seeing her startled expression. "There's a small cottage near the creek where the previous foreman lived. It's modest but comfortable. Mrs. Peterson stays there now, but she's mentioned wanting to move back to town to be near her daughter." Maribel stared at him in disbelief. "You would offer me a home, but why?" "Because everyone deserves safety and respect." He hesitated, then added, "and because I've come to care about your welfare, more than might be proper to admit after such a short acquaintance." His frankness left her speechless. "You could work in town," Matthew continued. "I understand the hotel is seeking help, as Sarah mentioned to me. You'd earn your own way, answerable to no one but yourself." The possibility of independence, true independence, was intoxicating. But fear still gnawed at her. "Frank would never allow it. Legally, as my stepfather, he has certain rights." "Not as many as you might think." Matthew's expression hardened slightly. "You're of age, Maribel. 21, correct? He has no legal right to control your movements or your earnings." "He controls the property that was my mother's, our home." "Yes, but he doesn't control you." Matthew leaned forward. "Unless you allow him to." The truth of his words struck Maribel with the force of revelation. Frank's power over her existed largely because she believed in it, because years of manipulation and isolation had convinced her she had no alternatives. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fear is natural," Matthew replied, "but so is courage. And I believe you have plenty of that, even if you don't recognize it yet." That night, Maribel lay awake in Matthew's comfortable bed, her mind racing with possibilities she had never dared consider before. Freedom, independence, a life guided by her own choices rather than Frank's cruelty. And Matthew himself, a man so different from any she had known that he seemed almost impossible. His kindness came without conditions, his respect without demands. He had opened his home to her, a virtual stranger, because it was the right thing to do. By morning, Maribel had made her decision. When Mrs. Peterson brought her breakfast tray, she asked if Matthew was available to speak with her. "He's just returned from checking the north pasture," Mrs. Peterson replied. "I'll send him up directly." Minutes later, a knock sounded at the door and Matthew entered, his expression curious. "You wanted to see me?" Maribel nodded, sitting up straighter against the pillows. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choices. And I want to accept your offer, the cottage, I mean, if it's still available." She twisted the bedsheet between her fingers nervously. "I'll pay proper rent, of course, once I secure employment." Matthew's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "The cottage is yours for as long as you need it. As for rent, we can discuss that when you're earning a steady wage." "Thank you." The words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what he was offering, not just shelter, but a chance at a new life. "There's something else," she continued, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I need to return to Frank's house once more. There are things of my mother's I won't leave behind, her Bible, which you kindly brought with my bag, but also her wedding ring and a few keepsakes hidden beneath a floorboard in my room." Matthew frowned. "I don't like the idea of you returning there." "Nor do I," Maribel admitted. "But I won't truly be free unless I retrieve those items. They're all I have left of her." After a moment's consideration, Matthew nodded. "Very well, but I'm coming with you. We'll go together, collect your belongings, and inform your stepfather of your decision. He'll be angry." "Likely so," Matthew agreed. "But he can't stop you, and he won't harm you while I'm present." 2 days later, Maribel found herself in Matthew's wagon once again, this time traveling back to the place she had called home for most of her life. Her health had improved remarkably under proper care, though anxiety about the confrontation ahead made her stomach clench uncomfortably. "Remember," Matthew said as they approached the farmhouse, "you're making a statement, not asking permission. You're an adult woman exercising your right to live independently." Maribel nodded, grateful for his reassuring presence beside her. For the first time, she saw Frank's house through an outsider's eyes, the peeling paint, sagging porch, and general air of neglect that spoke of his miserly nature and her own overworked state. Frank was splitting wood in the yard when they arrived, his expression darkening at the sight of them. He drove the axe into the chopping block with unnecessary force and strode toward the wagon. "Finally remembered where you belong, did you?" he called to Maribel before turning his glare on Matthew. "Tired of playing nursemaid already, James?" Matthew helped Maribel down from the wagon, his manner deliberately courteous. "Good afternoon, Mr. Denton. Maribel has recovered well, as you can see. No thanks to you, taking her away when a day's rest would have sufficed." Frank's gaze swept over Maribel critically. "At least you look fit for work now. There's plenty waiting for you." Maribel took a deep breath, drawing strength from Matthew's steady presence. "Actually, Frank, I haven't come back to stay. I've come to collect my personal belongings." Frank's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. "What nonsense is this? I'm leaving," she said, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I've decided to accept a position in town and will be renting accommodations near my workplace." "The hell you will," Frank's face flushed with anger. "This is your home. Your place is here." "This hasn't been my home since my mother died," Maribel replied quietly. "It's been my prison." Frank took a threatening step forward, but Matthew moved slightly in front of Maribel, not enough to appear confrontational, but sufficient to communicate his protective intent. "Miss Hayes is of legal age," Matthew said calmly. "She's free to make her own decisions regarding her residence and employment. You—" Frank jabbed a finger at Matthew. "You've put these ideas in her head, turned her against her family." "You're not my family," Maribel said, the words bringing a strange, liberating clarity. You're the man who married my mother and made both our lives miserable. The man who locked me in a cellar when I displeased you and worked me like a servant without wages." Frank's expression contorted with rage. "After all I've done for you, what have you done for me?" Maribel interrupted, years of suppressed feelings finally finding voice. "Besides, take my mother's property, spend her money, and treat me worse than you would treat a dog." For a moment, it seemed Frank might lose all control. His hands balled into fists and a vein pulsed at his temple. Then, perhaps remembering Matthew's presence or calculating the consequences of violence, he changed tactics. "This is about money, isn't it? You think you'll find better elsewhere? Fine. I'll pay you a fair wage for your work here, $2 a week." "It's not about money," Maribel said, though the offer more than she had ever expected from Frank confirmed he had always been capable of treating her better. "It's about respect, dignity, the right to make my own choices." Frank's gaze shifted between them, his expression calculating. "So that's how it is. You found yourself a protector, have you? Spread your legs for a rich rancher and think you've secured your future." Matthew stepped forward, his easy manner hardening into something dangerous. "You'll apologize for that remark, Mr. Denton. Now, or what?" Frank sneered. "Or I'll demonstrate why men in Montana learned not to insult women in my presence." Matthew's voice was soft but carried an unmistakable threat. "And then, I'll inform every business owner in Awahi exactly how you've treated your stepdaughter all these years. How do you think that might affect your standing in the community?" The threat of public shame accomplished what moral arguments could not. Frank's expression soured, but he muttered, "No offense meant to either of you." "Apology accepted," Matthew said curtly. "Now, Maribel has come to collect her personal belongings. I suggest you make this process as smooth as possible." Under Matthew's watchful eye, Frank could do little but fume as Maribel entered the house and gathered her few possessions. In her bedroom, she quickly located the loose floorboard beneath her bed and retrieved her mother's treasures, the gold wedding band, a cameo brooch, and a small packet of letters tied with a faded ribbon. As she packed these items alongside her clothing and few books, Maribel felt a curious lightness. The room that had been her sanctuary from Frank's temper now seemed like just another part of her cage. In the kitchen, she hesitated before her mother's china teapot, the one nice thing that had survived Frank's careless handling over the years. "That's not yours," Frank snapped from the doorway. "It was my mother's," Maribel replied, "given to her by her mother. And now it's mine, as was everything else your mother owned." Matthew, who had followed Frank into the kitchen, spoke quietly. "Surely a family heirloom should remain with family, Mr. Denton. You have no daughter to pass it to." For a long moment, Frank seemed ready to refuse out of pure spite. Then, perhaps seeing the resolute expressions facing him, he shrugged. "Take it. It's just gathering dust anyway." Maribel carefully wrapped the teapot in a dish towel and placed it in her carpet bag. It was a small victory, but it felt momentous. Outside, as Matthew loaded her belongings into the wagon, Frank made one final attempt to assert control. "When this arrangement fails, and it will, don't expect to come crawling back here." Maribel met his gaze steadily. "I won't be back, Frank. Not ever." As the wagon pulled away, Maribel didn't look back at the farmhouse. Her future lay ahead, uncertain but full of possibility in a way she had never before experienced. "Are you all right?" Matthew asked softly as they traveled toward his ranch. "Yes," Maribel replied, surprised to find it was true. "For the first time in years, I believe I am." The small cottage near the creek proved to be far more charming than Matthew's description had suggested. Though modest in size with just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, It boasted windows that filled the space with light, a stone fireplace that would keep it cozy in winter, and a small porch overlooking the water. Mrs. Peterson has already moved her things to town, Matthew explained as he carried Maribel's bags inside. She says to tell you she's left fresh linens on the bed and basic provisions in the pantry to get you started. Maribel turned in a slow circle, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings. It's lovely, far nicer than I expected. It needs a woman's touch, Matthew said, setting down her bags, but I hope you'll find it comfortable. It's perfect, she assured him, running her hand over the back of a rocking chair by the fireplace. More than perfect. I've never had a space that was truly mine before. Matthew smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. I've taken the liberty of speaking with Mrs. Reynolds at the hotel. She's eager to meet you regarding the position they have available. I've arranged for you to see her tomorrow if that suits you. Maribel's eyes widened. You've done so much already, I don't know how to thank you. Your happiness is thanks enough, he replied, then looked embarrassed by his own sentiment. That is to say, I'm glad to be of service. An awkward silence fell between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Matthew cleared his throat. Well, I should let you settle in. The main house is just beyond that stand of cottonwoods if you need anything. Don't hesitate to come up day or night. Thank you, Matthew, for everything. He nodded, placed his hat on his head, and turned to go. At the door, he paused. Maribel? Yes, I'm proud of you. What you did today took remarkable courage. After he left, Maribel moved around the cottage, arranging her few possessions to make the space her own. Her mother's teapot took pride of place on the small mantel. She placed the Bible on the bedside table and tucked the ring and letters into a drawer for safekeeping. For the first time in her adult life, she was answerable to no one but herself. The freedom was dizzying, almost frightening in its scope. But beneath the uncertainty lay a bedrock of determination. She would make this new life work, no matter what challenges arose. The next morning, Maribel dressed in her best and only good dress, a navy blue cotton with white piping that she had carefully maintained over the years. She braided her hair into a coronet around her head, hoping to appear both respectable and capable for her meeting with Mrs. Reynolds. As she was pinning the last strand in place, a knock sounded at her door. Matthew stood on the porch, holding the reins of a gentle-looking mare. Good morning, he greeted her. I thought you might need transportation into town. I had planned to walk, Maribel admitted. Matthew shook his head. It's nearly 5 miles, too far for a lady, especially one still recovering her strength. I wouldn't want to put you out, no inconvenience at all, he assured her. This is Daisy. She's the gentlest mare on the ranch and perfect for a lady rider. Consider her at your disposal while you're staying here. Maribel approached the horse, stroking her velvety nose. She's beautiful. But I'm not sure I remember how to ride. It's been years. It will come back to you, Matthew promised. And Daisy won't give you any trouble. She's steady as they come. With Matthew's help, Maribel mounted the mare, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. The familiar sensation of being on horseback did indeed return quickly, bringing with it memories of happier times when her mother was alive and had taught her to ride. The hotel is on Main Street, you can't miss it, Matthew told her, adjusting the stirrup length to better accommodate her. Mrs. Reynolds is expecting you at 10 o'clock. Wish me luck, Maribel said, gathering the reins. Matthew's smile was warm. You don't need luck. You're capable and intelligent. Mrs. Reynolds will recognize that immediately. His confidence in her abilities, so different from Frank's constant belittlement, gave Maribel courage as she rode into town. Awahi was experiencing a period of growth, with new buildings going up alongside the established businesses. The Silver Spur Hotel, where she was to meet Mrs. Reynolds, was among the newer establishments, a handsome two-story structure with a wide veranda and freshly painted sign. Maribel tied Daisy to the hitching post and took a moment to straighten her dress and check her hair before climbing the steps to the entrance. Inside, the hotel lobby was modestly elegant, with polished wood floors, comfortable seating, and a gleaming reception desk. A stout, gray-haired woman with keen eyes and a no-nonsense manner approached. "You must be Miss Hayes. I'm Beatrice Reynolds." "Yes, madam. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Reynolds gestured toward a side door. "Let's talk in my office, shall we?" The interview that followed was thorough but fair. Mrs. Reynolds asked about Maribel's experience with household management, cooking, and accounting, all skills she had developed running Frank's home. When Maribel explained her circumstances, carefully omitting the worst details of Frank's treatment, Mrs. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Matthew James speaks very highly of you," she remarked. "Says you're honest, hardworking, and deserving of an opportunity." "Mr. James has been very kind," Maribel replied, hoping her blush wasn't too obvious. Mrs. Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "He's a good man. One of the few who came to Nevada with money and didn't lose his decency along the way." She straightened a paper on her desk. "Well, Miss Hayes, the position is for assistant manager. You'd help oversee the maids, manage inventory, handle some bookkeeping, and occasionally serve guests when we're short-handed. The pay is $30 a month plus one meal per day. Hours are long, 6 days a week from 7 in the morning until at least 6 in the evening, later if needed." It was more money than Maribel had ever dreamed of earning. "That sounds more than fair, Mrs. Reynolds. When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if that suits you." "Perfect, Mrs. Reynolds rose and extended her hand. "Welcome to the Silver Spur, Miss Hayes." As Maribel rode back to the cottage, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Employment, independence, and a home of her own, things that had seemed impossible just a week earlier, were now realities. And underlying it all was Matthew's steadfast support, offered without expectation of return. The weeks that followed established a new pattern for Maribel's life. Each morning, she rode Daisy into town, worked diligently at the hotel, and returned to her cottage as evening fell. The work was demanding but satisfying, and Mrs. Reynolds proved to be a fair employer who recognized and rewarded competence. With her first month's wages, Maribel purchased fabric for new dresses, practical books on household management and cooking, and a small but significant luxury, a bottle of lavender water that reminded her of her mother. She insisted on paying Matthew a fair rent for the cottage, though he tried to refuse. Eventually, they compromised on a sum that was below market value but sufficient to preserve Maribel's pride. Her interactions with Matthew during this period were cordial but somewhat formal. He seemed determined to give her space to establish her independence, visiting the cottage only occasionally to check on her welfare, or invite her to Sunday dinner at the main house. Those dinners became the highlight of Maribel's week, a chance to enjoy Matthew's company in the relaxed setting of his home. Often, his foreman and ranch hands would join them, creating a lively atmosphere of camaraderie that contrasted sharply with the tense, silent meals of her life with Frank. Gradually, Maribel began to recognize the stirrings of deeper feelings for Matthew. His kindness, integrity, and quiet strength appealed to her in ways no man had before. But she was cautious, aware that her gratitude might be coloring her perception. And Matthew, while unfailingly considerate, maintained a certain reserve that she couldn't quite interpret. Autumn deepened toward winter, bringing cooler temperatures to Awahi. One Sunday in late November, Maribel arrived at the main house for dinner to find Matthew alone in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to prepare a meal. "Where's Mrs. Peterson?" she asked, setting down the apple pie she had baked that morning. Matthew looked up from the pot he was stirring, his expression rueful. "Her daughter's baby decided to arrive early. She left for town at dawn." He gestured at the stove. "I'm afraid I'm a poor substitute as a cook." Maribel laughed and removed her shawl. "Step aside, then. Let me help before you burn down your beautiful home." Together, they salvaged the beef stew Matthew had started and prepared cornbread to accompany it. Working alongside him in the kitchen felt surprisingly intimate, a domestic partnership that Maribel found herself longing to make permanent. "You're a natural at this," Matthew observed as she expertly seasoned the stew. "Years of practice," she replied. "Though I must admit, cooking is more enjoyable when it's by choice rather than obligation." As they sat down to eat, Matthew seemed unusually thoughtful. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said after they had eaten in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Oh," Maribel looked up, curious. "Are you happy here? With your new situation, I mean." The question caught her off guard. "Of course. How could I not be? I have meaningful work, a lovely home, and—" She hesitated, then finished softly. "Good friends." Matthew nodded, but something in his expression suggested he had hoped for a different answer. "I'm glad. Your happiness matters to me." "Why did you ask?" Maribel pressed gently. He set down his fork and met her gaze directly. "Because I care about you, Maribel. More than I should, perhaps, given our circumstances." Her heart quickened. "What circumstances?" "You've only just gained your independence," Matthew said carefully. "You're experiencing freedom for the first time in years. I wouldn't want to complicate that for you." Understanding dawned. "You mean you've kept your distance out of concern for my autonomy?" He nodded, his blue eyes serious. "You needed space to discover who you are without anyone else's expectations shaping your choices, even mine." Maribel reached across the table to touch his hand. "That may be the most considerate thing anyone has ever done for me." "It wasn't entirely selfless," Matthew admitted. "I needed to be certain that if you came to care for me, it would be for myself alone, not out of gratitude or dependence." "And now?" Maribel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I find I can't keep my feelings to myself any longer." Matthew turned his hand to clasp hers. "I love you, Maribel. I think I have since that first day at your stepfather's farm when you accepted my help with the pump despite the risk it posed for you." Joy flooded through Maribel, bright and warm as sunshine after storm. "I love you too, Matthew. Not out of gratitude, though I'll always be thankful for your kindness. I love you for the man you are, honorable, gentle, and stronger than anyone I've ever known." Matthew rose from his chair and came around the table, drawing Maribel to her feet. "May I kiss you?" In answer, she raised her face to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as they both surrendered to feelings long held in check. When they finally parted, Matthew kept her close, his arms around her waist. "I never want you to feel trapped or controlled again," he said softly. "Whatever happens between us, your independence matters to me." "I know," Maribel replied. "That's why I can give my heart to you freely. You've shown me that love doesn't diminish freedom, it expands it." Winter settled over Awahi, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. Christmas approached, and with it, a new chapter in Maribel's life. Matthew proposed on a crisp December evening as they walked along the creek near her cottage, the ground crunching beneath their boots and their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, taking both her hands in his, "but I'm certain of my feelings. I want to build a life with you, Maribel, a partnership based on mutual respect and love." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "1,000 times yes." They were married on New Year's Day 1880 in the small church in Awahi with Mrs. Reynolds, Mrs. Peterson, and the ranch hands as witnesses. Maribel wore a new dress of deep blue velvet, a Christmas gift from Matthew, with her mother's cameo brooch pinned at her throat. As they exchanged vows, Maribel marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the darkness of Frank's cellar to the light of Matthew's love, she had traveled a path of hardship and healing that had ultimately led to joy. That evening, as Matthew carried her across the threshold of the main house, now their home together, Maribel felt the last shadows of her past finally recede. This was where she belonged, not because circumstances or another's will had placed her here, but because she had chosen this life and this love for herself. In the spring, news reached them that Frank Denton had sold the farm and left Nevada, reportedly heading for California. The information brought Maribel an unexpected sense of closure. Frank no longer held any power over her life or her happiness. As the seasons passed, the James Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Matthew's skill with horses and cattle, combined with Maribel's talent for household and financial management, created a thriving enterprise. They built a reputation for fair dealing and generosity that made them respected figures in the community. 2 years after their wedding, Maribel gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas after Matthew's father. The following year brought a daughter, Lillian, named for Maribel's mother. As their family grew, so did their commitment to creating a home where love and respect formed the foundation of every interaction. On the 5th anniversary of the day Matthew had first come to her stepfather's farm to fix the pump, he surprised Maribel with a special gift, a beautiful rocking chair for their porch, handcrafted from the finest oak. "For watching the sunset," he explained as she ran her hand over the smooth wood. "And for telling our children stories of how their brave mother found the courage to choose her own path." Maribel smiled through happy tears. "And of how their father gave her not just the best room in his house, but the best place in his heart." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, their children playing nearby and the ranch peaceful around them, Maribel reflected on the remarkable journey from imprisonment to freedom, from loneliness to love. The cellar of her past had been dark indeed, but it had made the light of her present life shine all the brighter by contrast. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over the years. "That sometimes," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The longest journeys take us exactly where we need to be." And as the stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky above their home, Maribel knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just shelter, but her true place in the world alongside the man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it existed.